What can I say? I was stunned. My wife Maggie just dropped a bombshell on me. Had two big bombshells drop on me. Mac, we need to talk, she said when I came home from work. She was still dressed in her business suit that she wore as an accountant. I was dressed in my overalls, which I wore to run my chocolate business. I am Angus Mac McDougall, and my wife is Margaret Sullivan McDougall. Yes, she hyphenates her last name. Quite pretentious, if you ask me, but it doesn't matter. Her name is Maggie. I am of Scottish descent, and she is of Irish descent. Of course, this should have been my first hint that we were in fact incompatible. I was in love with her golden blonde hair, green eyes, and stunning body at first sight. We had met 10 years earlier when I had just gotten out of the army, and we went to college together. She was 18 and I was 22. I used the GI Bill to get her culinary degree, and she, of course, was going to get the aforementioned accounting degree. For some strange reason, we hit it off. It was probably because she was a chocolate connoisseur, and I wanted to make chocolates and cookies and basically anything chocolatey, come to think of it. My mother had a weakness for chocolate, like many women. It was a market where chocolate was always in great demand. While most businesses do most of their sales at Christmas, chocolate makers can make money all year round. Christmas, mainly, but also Valentine's Day, Easter, Independence Day, and so on. My little chocolate shop does better business on Valentine's Day than Christmas most years. Oh, and I hate my name. Angus. Seriously, Mom, did you have to go and call me Angus? I introduce myself to everyone as Mac. No one calls me Angus, not even my wife. Okay, Mom and Dad call me Angus, but only when they're mad at me. Any other time I'm Mac. So Maggie just told me that we need to talk. I immediately tensed up because every guy on earth knows what those words mean when put together in a sentence. We know this, and we are afraid of it. We need to talk has been a precursor to breakups and divorces since time immemorial. So, with a feeling of impending doom, I sat down at the table and looked at her. I knew my world was about to collapse around me. 10 years together. 8 of them were happily married. Well, I was happily married. I thought the same about Maggie. I mentally ran through the possible reasons for what she was about to say. Sex. Never. We had a great sex life. Money. Unlikely. I reduced my net income by 6 points per year. Almost $250,000 after everything was sorted out with overhead, my employees' wages, taxes, and so on. Everything was going very well for us here. Our combined income was close to $375,000 a year. We've had enough. Lack of love? Not from my side. I loved her with all my heart and soul. Did she fall out of love with me somewhere along the way? Just a week ago, we were talking about children. She interrupted my thoughts by pushing a hideous manila envelope across the kitchen table towards me as I sat down. Maggie, please tell me it's not what I'm thinking. I looked at her, and her face turned into a studied mask that didn't give anything away. I'm sorry, Mac, she said quietly. I should have talked to you earlier, but I want a divorce. Why? I asked with much more calm in my voice than I felt at that moment. It's complicated. She avoided looking away. Have you met someone else? I must have been in shock because I still didn't fly into a rage. Yes, she said even more quietly, almost in a whisper. How long? I asked. God, what was wrong with me? I should have stood there fuming, pacing back and forth as I called her anything but a child of God. I had to threaten the one she traded me for. I should have felt something other than complete numbness. 8 months, she said. I closed my eyes. 8 months. I repeated. You've been cheating on me for 8 months now, and the first thing I hear about it is that you want a divorce. I shrugged my shoulders. I guess you're going to rip me off in court. Because attachment alienation is frowned upon here in California, I have very few options for seeking help here. No, Mac, she said, shaking her head slowly. Your business is yours, not mine. I inherited the house from my grandparents. but I will give you a few days to vacate it. After you find your own place, of course. For some time, I will seek minimal alimony until I get married again. However, nothing that could upset the bank balance. I sighed. I know him? I asked finally. If you harm him in any way, you will end up in prison, she said unnecessarily. It's not that I didn't want to set him up, but I didn't want to lose my business either. I know it. However, I think I have a right to know who has been bullying me for the last 8 months. I shrugged. Reginald Pennington, she said, holding her head straight. This, my friends, was shock number 2. I already hated it, even before this. Okay, now I am angry. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath to calm myself. Reginald Pennington, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, mega-rich thanks to old money. I warned Maggie about him after we had dinner with him to discuss some of the charities we were all involved with at the time. She laughed at my warning and told me he was harmless. Yes, exactly. Harmless as a rattlesnake. We met him at a charity event in our community, and even then I didn't like the way he looked at Maggie. He looked at me with contempt and at her with pure lust in his eyes. Barely able to contain my anger, I was finally able to look Maggie in the eyes again. Well, then, I guess there's not much I can do about it. I shrugged my shoulders as nonchalantly as I could. I wish it didn't come to that, Mac. She smiled sadly, which I knew was an act. She was just trying to ease my pain. However, I saw through it for what it really was. It's a lie, Maggie, I said calmly. Now my brain was working on a plan. But it doesn't matter. I'm not going to challenge the divorce as long as everything is as you say. You know, I'll have my lawyer look at the papers with me before I sign them. She nodded. I wouldn't expect anything less, Mac. Just so you know, this wasn't something you did or didn't do. Reginald and I just moved to the soul level. I really love you, but I'm in love with him. I'm really sorry it turned out this way, Mac. What nonsense. She was in love with his money. His family is worth billions. That night, at the charity ball we attended, he danced too close to Maggie, and when they separated, I noticed that he had cleaned himself up after she returned to our table. But since I didn't want to rock the boat just yet, I simply said, I'm sorry too. Well, after this little conversation, she handed me a manila envelope. You will be officially served in the morning, Mac. I'll meet you with my lawyer at Tim's office. This is just a preview of what I want from the settlement. She means Tim Grayson, my best friend since elementary school and my lawyer in everything I do since I founded McDougal's Chocolate Factory. You know, get rid of alimony, and that's the end of it. Reggie is rich. You don't need my money, do you? I knew it was unlikely, but she owed me at least that much. She seemed to think about it. If she had gone through with it, I might not have even completed the plan that was already half formed in my head. No, Mac, I need something from all of this. After all, I really wasted 10 years of my life on you. Oh no, that statement right there, that our entire marriage, in fact our entire time together while we were dating and engaged, was just a waste of her time, inspired me. I looked at the proposed alimony and raised one eyebrow. She wanted alimony of $200 per month for 2 years or until she remarried, whichever came first. That was about half of what I made per month after overhead and paying my employees. I could live on it, and I had more than enough saved in my personal savings account. I pretended to think it over. Great. I think it will be worth it in the end. Finally, I shrugged my shoulders. Now I'm going to pack my things. I'm leaving tonight. And I did it. I packed my suitcase and suit bag with my clothes, toiletries, and all that crap. I also built up my extensive music CD collection, which included everything from Marty Robbins to Metallica to Mozart. Yes, she covered all these genres. I even had some Sir Mix-a-Lot in there, just for a laugh. I loaded it all into my bullet and went from there. I left, and less than an hour later, I called Kat on her cell phone once I was on the road. Hello, Mac. What's the matter? Kat answered after the second ring. Cat, I just got kicked out and I'm going to be served with divorce papers in Tim's office this morning. Maggie is bargaining, at least in her mind. I snorted. The bitterness finally came into my voice. Are you kidding me? She seemed as shocked as I was. No, I'll be staying at the Holiday Inn until I find a place to stay, I answered. Get your ass to me right now, mister. Wonderful. Yes, ma'am. I involuntarily grinned. Fine. See you when I see you. She ended the conversation, and I couldn't help but smile and sadly shook my head. Katrina Monroe is my manager at the chocolate factory. She looks a lot like Aisha Tyler, only a little younger, although just as tall, 180-centimeter Nubian goddess. We all call her Cat, and she doesn't mind. Her boyfriend, Darius Jackson, plays for the Los Angeles Dodgers, which made him cool in my opinion. He was currently away for 8 games and will be back sometime next week. This gave me the opportunity to spend a few nights with Kat in her spare room before he returned. Darius was calm with me, so maybe I could stay even longer. No, I needed to find my own place. I probably could have immediately bought an inexpensive house with the money I had in the bank. But the 5050 division of the common property has not yet taken place. Yes, I'll probably have to rent for a while before I can afford my own home again. My thoughts were interrupted when I realized that I was not far from Kat's house. Her boyfriend only stayed there occasionally, but he continued to insist that Kat move to Los Angeles with him. However, Kat hasn't moved yet. At first, she wanted complete dedication from him, like committing to putting a ring on your finger. So, I was 32 years old, still in good shape, already a millionaire, but I shit myself and was destroyed by the woman I fell in love with and married. My future ex-wife, a cheating gold digger. I pulled into Kat's driveway and parked right next to her little Ford Fusion. I swear to God, that little car cowered in fear of Bullet. I grinned as I gave Bullet one more shot at the engine before turning off the big V8. As I opened the trunk and grabbed my suitcase, I saw Kat open the door and step out wearing only her Daisy Dukes jeans and a tank top. It took my breath away. However, I quickly shook these thoughts out of my head. I closed the trunk and walked up to her, and Kat let me in without saying a word. Her expression was one of disbelief struggling with several other emotions. I'm pretty sure I was still in shock at that moment. Yes, I was shocked. That was how I still perceived it. But before I could get inside, I dropped my suitcase and fell to my knees. The depth of what had happened finally dawned on my shock-fogged brain. I had held it in for as long as I could, but now it all burst out of my brain compartment and out of my eyes. Strong, heartbreaking sobs shook my body. Tears flowed. SHH, everything is fine now. You'll be fine, Mac, she reassured. No, it will not. I shook my head. Yes, I bogged down in self-pity. I freely admit this. She pulled me to my feet, and we went. Okay, she left, and I stumbled into the living room and collapsed on her large leather sofa. Hey, we can watch Darius play. Tonight the Dodgers play Braves in Atlanta. She tried to cheer me up, and she knows how much I love baseball. I sniffled like a child. Okay, I guess it won't hurt. I tried to smile, but, in my opinion, it looked more like a grimace. She turned on the TV, and the game was in the 4th inning in Atlanta. The score was already 4-2 in favor of the Dodgers. It really cheered me up and took my mind off my own problems. Kat brought us both beers, and we watched the game together. Things went wrong for a while, but we eventually won in extra innings. By the end, we were laughing and cheering as Darius caught a flying ball to end the game and secure another great Dodgers win. I took a long sip of the local beer when suddenly Kat's laughter stopped. "You've got to be kidding me," she exclaimed loudly, her mouth falling open in shock as she glared daggers at the TV. I followed her gaze and saw that Darius was kissing some woman there. Is there something in the water? I wondered out loud. That was all I could think of to say when I saw Kat's relationship going down the drain along with my marriage. There must be some kind of treasonous substance in this water, she growled. I looked at her, and the fire in her dark brown eyes made me get nervous. And a white woman. He said he doesn't even like white women. I listened to her argue with him for about 20 minutes. Then she looked at me and burst into sobs of her own. I returned the favor by hugging her as she let it all out. As she cried, she looked at me with bloodshot eyes that pretty much mirrored my own. Look at us, huh? Two cuckolds. She laughed sadly, and I smiled as a few stray tears rolled down my face as well. Well, at least Maggie did it alone with me. I shrugged my shoulders. He did it on national television. I'm so sorry, Kat. It's not your fault, honey. She hugged me tightly, then reached for her cell phone. Excuse me. I'll call his cheating ass and tell him what time it is. No problem. I nodded as she pressed the speed dial button. Hello, Darius. Yeah. Yes, we saw the game. Mac is here because his cheating wife is divorcing him and kicking him out. No, he's going to stay with me for a few days, just until he finds his own place. No, and that's failing me as to why I'm calling you. I saw you playing tag with that woman. She stopped and listened for a few seconds, rolling her eyes. She silently put a finger to her lips and put her phone on speaker so I could listen. I nodded understandingly. But, baby, I have needs, you know? She doesn't mean anything to me. I just need to grab some snacks while I'm on the road. You must understand this. He whined and sucked up. As far as I was concerned, stupid had no place on the Dodgers now. Well, Darius, we're done now, she said with iron in her voice. I'll have the crap you left here sent back to your home in Los Angeles. I don't want to see you or hear anything from you. Do you understand me? But, baby, he shuddered, and there was desperation in his voice. Nope. You've lost the right to call me baby. I don't play this shit. We're done. And we're done. Finish. Get this into your head right now. Goodbye, Darius. I hope this one was worth it. Before he could whine again, Kat ended the call and blocked his number. She looked at me and smiled sadly. Okay, it's all over now. Zero tolerance. I nodded. Zero tolerance. I agree, Kat. Cheaters don't deserve a second chance. So what does she do about the divorce? Don't even tell me she's going to dry clean you. I swear I'll blow this blonde's head off. Kat always turned me on with her euphemisms, and I found myself smiling at it. Oddly enough, no. She wants $200 a month in alimony, which is probably why I won't try to stop her from getting married as soon as possible. But otherwise the agreement she's proposing is very fair. I shrugged my shoulders. I cried it all out and entered the acceptance phase of divorce grief. Okay, acceptance was still a long way off. I wanted to make them pay, and now that I was thinking clearly, my plan began to take shape in my head. It would depend on several things. For example, from the one who officiated their wedding. But the more I thought about it in my head, the better I felt. So she must be serious about him. Did she tell you who it was? Asked Kat. Yes, and you will like it. Reginald Pennington Roman IV. I grinned. Kat's eyes widened. I would never mistake Maggie for a gold digger. I wouldn't accept it either, until now. Apparently she had everyone fooled. I shrugged my shoulders. Her parents never liked me, so I'm pretty sure they pushed her into it, at least a little. I was never good enough for their little darling. Okay, I have to admit that I let my bitterness show for a moment. Well, off they go. Kat shrugged. I see the wheels turning. Mac, what are you planning? Kat could always tell when I was really thinking hard. She saw this quite often at work, when I had to solve some problem in a store or factory. Revenge of monumental proportions. I smiled serenely as I told her about it. Just trust me on this. This will leave a lasting impression on them for the rest of their lives. Okay, I'm almost afraid to ask. What do you already have? Now Kat was giggling. I told her my basic plan, and she burst into heart-stopping laughter. "You're just crazy," she squealed as tears of laughter streamed down her face. "Okay, we need to figure out how to do this." That's what we did. We stayed up, drank beer, and thought about our plan of action for the moment the wedding took place. We figured it would be 3 months since I wasn't going to fight the divorce. They will get married 6 months after that. We'd be ready, and if I could stay cordial with Maggie and, yes, even Reginald, I might be able to get to the wedding without crashing it. By the time I carried my suitcase and bag to the guest room, it was already well after midnight. I told Kat that I would be late at the store because I had to meet Tim in the morning to sign divorce papers, and she understood. She said she would keep it up until I got there, or I could take the day off if I wanted. I slept surprisingly well that night. Maybe it was the beer we drank in moderation, or maybe it was the twisted and evil plan I hatched to make Reginald and Maggie's wedding an unforgettable experience for them. Either way, I was pleased with what we found out. I got up early in the morning with a smile on my face. I heard bacon and eggs sizzling on the stove, and the aroma woke me up even more. Plus, she had fresh coffee brewed, which was even better. I couldn't remember the last time Maggie made me breakfast. Kat cooked, and we were just temporary roommates. I showered and dressed in a t-shirt and jeans, since I didn't feel like going to the store after meeting Tim. I then joined Kat in the kitchen. "Good morning, Kat," I smiled, sitting down on the bar stool in her kitchen corner. "Good morning, sunshine." She gave me a dazzling smile. "You look much better this morning than when you came here last night." "Thanks to you and the beer." I nodded in gratitude, which caused her to laugh musically. I had to laugh too because Kat's laugh is contagious. "Well, here's your eggs and bacon. Honey, will you come to work after you see Tim?" She put a plate and a mug of coffee in front of me. "Thank you, Kat. No, I think I'll take the day off. I don't know how I will react after meeting with Maggie and her lawyer about signing the divorce." I shrugged my shoulders. "But I'll tell you what. I'll take you to lunch later and tell you what happened." Kat nodded. "You better do that, Mac. I'm glad I'm not going with you. If I saw her, I'd probably have to beat the crap out of her." "That's one of the reasons I love you, honey." I grinned. "You are the most loyal person I know." "Ooh, I love you too, boss." She smiled sweetly when I stood up and hugged me. "Hey, both of our exes cheated on us. I'm glad you're coping too." I told her and then let her go. At least they didn't cheat with each other. Now that would be a cliché. She snorted with laughter, and I had to chuckle at that. Absolutely right. But for us both to know about it on the same day, the biggest coincidence. I gave her my best impression of a comic book guy. Kat and I both love The Simpsons, so she immediately understood and tapped me on the shoulder, giggling. "You're right, Mac. Big coincidence. You and your conspiracy theories." I rolled my eyes, giving her a cheerful smile. "Hey, the truth is out there somewhere." Kat gave me a creepy look. When we finished cleaning and loaded her dishwasher, she handed me the key to her apartment. "Darius was supposed to have this, but I think you'll need it more than he will." She smiled. "Thank you, Kat." I smiled. "In a few days, I will find a place to live and won't disturb you." "Take your time, Mac," she assured me. "Trust me, honey. I'd rather have you around where I can keep an eye on you than have you alone where God only knows what you do on your own. My parents went through a divorce, so I know how my dad took it when my mom left him. I won't take my eyes off you." "Okay, Mommy." I grinned, and she tapped me on the shoulder with her own cheeky grin. I heard about what happened and that her mom was mentally unstable. She didn't cheat on Kat's father, but there were other issues with her personality and mental health that led her to drink and eventually divorce him. I didn't know all the details, but it wasn't as bad as my own situation. However, her father took it hard. As for some of the details of our relationship, Kat and I have known each other for 20 years. She's 2 years older than me, but she kind of looked after me at school when we were kids. Back then I was smaller than all the other boys, so I was often bullied. Kat was already taller than most boys and girls and was well on her way to Amazon status. She stood up for me, and no one wanted to test her. But that wasn't the only thing she was reacting to. She taught me how to stand up for myself. She taught me how to fight because my own parents would never have done it. She learned to take care of herself early. By the time we were teenagers, I had finally grown enough to be a couple of inches taller than her. Barely. I made my last growth spurt in my sophomore year of HS, and by that time Kat had stopped growing, and we've been there ever since. We've both gained weight since our college days, but we're still in good shape. She was a hurdler on the track team, and I played baseball. But while Kat was good enough to earn a scholarship to USC, I wasn't good enough at baseball to earn a scholarship. So instead, I joined the Army and then used my tuition account to go to school later. When I opened the chocolate shop shortly before I married Maggie, Kat applied for a job as a manager. She had an MBA, so I quickly scooped her up. Our first year, I couldn't pay her very much, but once word of mouth got around to it, we had almost so much business we couldn't handle it. I was able to attract some great people to work with, and Kat was and remains the best of them. A year later, I left her in charge so I could take Maggie with me on our belated honeymoon. During those 2 weeks, everything went as smooth as silk for Kat, and after the first year, we were well on our way to paying off the bank loan, and I could even afford to give everyone a raise. By the end of the third year, my store had a miniature factory attached to it, with a spacious kitchen and everything. I signed several contracts for the production of cocoa beans, and I was able to bring in some good exotic blends. In my 5th year, we sent out special orders for candy all over California, but I stubbornly refused to franchise or anything like that. However, we have become close to working only on special orders. I was offered millions for my company, but my employees and I refused to sell. They decided they didn't want to work for anyone but me. If I sold the store, all my employees would quit. This decided everything for me. I was going to keep it as a small business with my 20 employees, and we were just going to have fun and make money doing it. This, as it turned out, was the final nail in my coffin as far as my in-laws were concerned. Maggie's father wanted to invest in my business and expand it. I politely but firmly dismissed him, telling him I wanted to keep the business small with a family atmosphere. He enlightened me well, saying that expansion is the only way to make serious money. I firmly and less politely pointed out that I was already making serious money, but I didn't want to become as greedy as he was. I idly wondered what they would think about Maggie cheating on me and then divorcing me for Reginald, and realized that I didn't care, but that they probably approved of it. Old money attracts old money, and the Sullivans, while not as rich as the Penningtons, were still old money. That morning, after breakfast, Kat and I left the house. She left for work, and I went to visit Tim in his office. When I got there, Maggie hadn't shown up yet, so we talked about this shit until she got there. When she entered, Tim visibly tensed. I could tell from his body language that Maggie and her lawyer weren't the only ones present. I stood up, turned around, and sure enough, it was little Dickie Pennington himself. At that moment, I wanted nothing more than to wipe the smug grin off his face. Instead, I ignored his offered handshake and looked at Maggie. Well, let's get this over with. I shrugged. Tim discussed the proposed split and everything else. Because my business was not funded by her money or her family's money, and because the house was a gift from her parents after her grandparents died, they were not community property, but ours. My car, of course, was mine. I've been restoring it since high school. Tim surprised me. So, you are divorcing my client to marry Reginald Pennington Roman IV. Is that correct, Mrs. McDougal? The question took her by surprise. Well, she avoided. Please, a simple yes or no will be enough. Tim didn't leave her alone. Her lawyer, a Gloria Allred wannabe, leaned over and whispered something in Maggie's ear. Yes, she said quietly, lowering her eyes as if ashamed. Tim never called her Mrs. McDougal. And how soon did you plan to get married? Tim continued. Now the group included Maggie, Reggie Boy, and Gloria Jr. They whispered furiously back and forth. Tim took this opportunity to lean over and whisper child support in my ear. I simply nodded in response and smiled. He tried to force her not to pay her a dime. As the three stooges released their embrace, Maggie looked back at Tim. As soon as possible after the divorce becomes final. We've already planned most of the wedding itself. Tim nodded. And if these reports are true, he pulled out a detailed financial report on Reggie the kid. Mr. Pennington, who is here, on his own and without the numerous houses and cars that he owns, is solvent for almost $1 billion. My question, Mrs. McDougal, is this. Why would you want an honest, hard-working man like your husband to pay you alimony when you could just ask Mr. Pennington any money you wish to spend? Maggie again found herself embroiled in an altercation with Gloria Jr. and El Culo. Tim sent me a lightning-fast smile, and I smiled back as the three friends discussed their next move. As they emerged from the crowd, Gloria Jr. spoke. Then what would you offer as adequate compensation? She asked, focusing her stern gaze on me. Well, she can take all the furniture, not just her half. I don't care, I shrugged. Once again, gather together, dear friends. This time the whispers were more subdued, but eventually they broke and looked at Tim. We agree, the lawyer said. And so it went. I didn't have to pay child support, but I didn't get any furniture either. Gloria Jr. made the necessary changes to the divorce papers that we all signed, except for the snake boy, and the filing took place the same day the lawyer left. As I was walking back to my car, Maggie and baby Reggie came up to me. Angus, old man, I hope you're not offended. And again, he really extended his hand to me for a handshake. It did the trick. I took his hand and squeezed it very hard, so that his face was distorted in pain. Call me Angus again, Reginald, and I will make your life a living hell. To you, I'm Mr. McDougal. Understood? Why, yes, Mr. Mac McDougal. Real fear was written on his face. I let go of his hand before gangrene could set in, and he breathed a sigh of relief. That's because you called me Angus, I said calmly. Concerning Menskik, then no hard feelings. I smiled, turned and walked to my car. Now I feel good. I somehow stopped paying alimony and was essentially free of it once the divorce became final. That reminds me. I returned to them. Maggie, before I go, I need to return my grandmother's engagement ring. I extended my hand to her. Maggie looked at me as if I had just fallen from another planet. Then she took off her wedding rings and handed them to me. Thank you. I smiled, nodded to them, put the rings in my pocket, and walked back to my car. I started the powerful V8 engine and shifted it into gear while simultaneously squeezing the clutch and pressing the gas. The car's tires squealed as I pulled out of the parking lot, leaving some rubber on the asphalt and some smoke in the air. It wasn't something I did often, but I wanted to send a message loud and clear to the two lovebirds. I looked in the rearview mirror, and the idiot was standing there stunned, still gingerly clutching his right hand. I grinned happily as I walked towards the store. When I got there, Kat was happy to see me, as was everyone else. They all came up and hugged me or shook my hand and told me how sorry they were. I thanked them all and told them all to get back to work. However, I said it with a smile on my face to let them know that I appreciated their efforts to help me feel better. The thing is, I already felt good. On top of the attorney fees and half the court costs, and having to give up my half of the furniture, which I never really liked anyway. I just managed to get a bloodless divorce. Come on, Kat, I said. Let's go have lunch. I took us there on Bullet, and Kat really enjoyed riding it. She heard the rumble of the engine under the hood and felt the power emanating from it, like an aura of splendor. We ate and laughed. Two old friends shared a meal and our friendship, as well as new ones strengthening the bonds of recently betrayed love. I still can't believe that I had absolutely no idea that she was cheating on me. I finally hissed, voicing my own helplessness when it came to the fact that I was blind as far as Maggie was concerned. I must have been really stupid. No, Mac, you were in love. Love can blind us, you know. Kat smiled. I smiled involuntarily. Thank you, Kat. Letting her know how much I appreciate everything she has done for me, professionally and personally. She was much more than my office manager and friend. Now I have long become dependent on her. For the first time in school, when I was a small child who was smaller than everyone else. Then, as someone who wanted his business to succeed, he hired her as the most suitable and qualified from the group of applicants who applied. You never have to thank me, Mac. A nice bonus at the end of the year is enough gratitude. She grinned, and I laughed outright at that. Consider it done. I smiled and looked into her dark brown eyes with my dark blue pupils. She was the first to look away, and I noticed a slight blush on her caramel-colored face. It took me by surprise, but I quickly came to my senses. I told myself to stop it. She is my friend, and she also just experienced a loss. In all the years of our friendship, I had never looked at Kat like that before. Never in my life have I seen her as anything other than a friend, albeit a very beautiful friend. Of course, I noticed the fact that she is a very well put-together woman, just like last night at her house when I pulled up and she came outside to meet me. What purebred American man would not notice a gorgeous Amazon like her? But that was just what we guys do. It was different. I realized that I was not ready for this, and we quickly returned to other topics. After we finished lunch, I drove her back to the store and dropped her off there. She said, "I'll see you at home." So I drove up to the cliffs and looked out over the Pacific Ocean. I looked at my left hand and took off the ring that had been there for the last 8 years. I reached into my pocket and pulled out Maggie's engagement ring. I studied both of them, and just the sight of them made me feel sick. I then pulled out my grandmother's wedding ring and joined all 3 of them together. I put my grandmother's ring back in my pocket, then reached back and threw the wedding rings into the ocean as hard as I could. They glistened in the sun as they flew over the cliffs and fell into the white water, crashing against the rocks below. For me, it was symbolic. My marriage was broken, and it was a showdown. Of course, the divorce was going to end on its own anyway, but it was something I had to do for my own sanity and to be able to move on. Now, just because I gave a eulogy for my marriage, that didn't mean I gave up on my plan to get revenge on Maggie and Reggie the kid. Oh yeah, Reggie was going to pay for stealing my wife, and my wife was going to pay for being a cheating gold digger. Some would call me vindictive and a caveman. To those to whom I would simply say, "Fuck you." Walk a 30-kilometer forced march along the road in my shoes, and then judge me. After 3 months, everything was settled. Joint accounts were split 5,050. During this time, Kat and I coexisted as roommates and got along great. At work, no one cared that we lived together. It was a huge surprise when we returned home one evening to find wedding invitations in the mail. Maggie wasn't kidding. They scheduled the wedding a month after the official divorce decree. I smiled at Kat, and she smiled back. "Okay, now it's time to act," I said angrily as I drove us to Costco. Finding a wedding caterer was easy. A few months ago, he wanted to do business with us, but nothing came of it. I decided to, give him another chance, and this time handle everything myself. What made me really laugh was that Maggie was going to wear white, as was baby Reggie in his navy blue suit. He was a naval aviator in the early days of the war, and while I was serving on Captain Drake's Alpha Command, it seemed like he couldn't even wear a regular black tuxedo. A few days before the wedding, I paid a visit to the caterer and replaced the chocolate cake mix with my own special mix. I grinned like a Cheshire cat as I replaced the cake mix with something else chocolate-flavored. No, it wasn't poison. It was just something that would make Maggie and baby Reggie's wedding unforgettable for everyone involved. So, what I did could be compared to a school prank, only done much more stylishly. But I had to get something back. They cuckolded me for 8 months before hitting me with divorce papers. Of course, she was very amicable in the divorce, and I was left with nothing but a broken heart. However, this heartbreak will cost them dearly. I kept Kat up to date on what was going on, and she laughed out loud when I told her that Operation Splatter was a success. The invitation included a reception where the real entertainment would begin. On the morning of the wedding, Kat and I showered at the same time. And no, we didn't shower together, although over the past few months we have become closer. However, we were still shy about the relationship, and I, for one, was worried that it would destroy our friendship, taking it to the next level. I'm just glad she installed these tankless water heaters. After changing into my Armani suit, I waited in the living room until Kat was ready. "Well, am I presentable?" she asked while I was watching a UCLA football game. I turned to look at her, and my jaw hit the floor. Before me was a vision of beauty that would be difficult to describe, but I'll try anyway. Kat wore an emerald green dress that hugged her curves like a glove. The shimmering material clung to her as if it was in love with her body and did not want to part with it. Her hair was styled in a shoulder-length updo that perfectly framed her beautiful face. She was wearing pumps that made her exactly the same height as me. Her toned calves were on full display, and the shoes accentuated them perfectly. "Dear God, you look amazing," I said when I was finally able to say coherent words. She smiled a perfect smile. "Thank you, Mac. You look good yourself." I blushed at these words. "Thank you, Kat," I said as we headed towards the door. We went to church. Ironically, Billy Idol's White Wedding was playing on the radio. As Bullet pulled into the parking lot, people turned and stared at the big V8 that announced our arrival. Every guest there except us was from high society with old money. Okay, this was going to be even more fun than I expected. We showed our invitations at the door. It appears that the Penningtons have made several enemies over the years with their business practices, thereby making audits unnecessary. This didn't surprise me at all. And the looks of contempt that Kat and I received from the snobbish elite made me feel even better about what was to happen on this beautiful day. As we took our places on the bench, I leaned over to Kat and whispered in her ear, "Remember not to eat anything chocolate at the reception." At this, she giggled softly and quickly kissed me on the cheek. The service was long and boring. Typical Catholic wedding. I had to fight myself a few times to stay awake, but it didn't matter. Reggie admittedly looked amazing in his Navy uniform. Another reason to hate this shit. He was a Navy officer before resigning to go into business with his family. His Annapolis class ring sparkled as he waited for Maggie to walk down the aisle. Then the wedding march started playing, and then she appeared, and next to her was her swaggering dad. I remembered our wedding and how he frowned at me the whole time. Now, however, he was beaming with pride that his dear little girl was finally marrying a man from her station. I wanted to punch this asshole in the face, but I refrained. Everything will be paid in full later. And so it happened. I won't bore you with the mundane details of the wedding vows that she didn't take seriously the first time, or the exchange of rings, or anything else, for that matter. I then won an Oscar for Best Actor, an Emmy, a Tony, and a Golden Globe, all at the same time when I congratulated them both when we arrived at the reception. Kat would have won Best Actress because she saw Maggie's betrayal of me as a betrayal of everyone who worked for me and also loved her like a sister. Reggie poked me in the face again. "Angus, old man, I hope you really are not offended." In the end, the one who was better won. It took all my self-control not to trample him into the ground. Instead, I said, "You're right. The one who was better won," after which I grabbed the slightly surprised Kat and kissed her. Kat froze for a moment and returned my kiss. Kat looked at Reggie and Maggie. Yes, he really won. She winked and left the happy couple standing with their mouths open. We exchanged grins as we took our assigned seats and had some lobster for dinner. It was actually delicious. Then it was time for the real fun when the wedding cake rolled out. Reggie and Maggie had a ceremonial cake cutting, with the ceremony cake being personally prepared for both of them. Everyone laughed and people came over to get a piece of the cake. We decided to wait until the end of the line as it was going to be a spectacular show. Of course, once we got to the cake itself, the show began. Of all people, it all started with a bride farting. The sound was heard from across the dining room. This was followed by the sound of the groom himself. They looked at each other in horror as the other guests began to get the same result. Maggie and baby Reggie jumped up and ran as fast as they could. They both rushed madly to the toilets and were soon followed by other guests. Kat and I left quickly, quietly, and sat in Bullet when we couldn't hold back our laughter any longer. We both had tears streaming down our faces as we nearly burst out laughing. "Oh my God, Mac!" Kat laughed, then grabbed her stomach and burst out laughing. I laughed just as hard as she did. "Do you think I used too much?" I said between bouts of laughter filled with tears. "How quickly does this substance work?" She laughed again. "Well, the Costco boxes said it works well, but don't use too much." I giggled when our laughter finally died down a little. "How many boxes did you put in the cake mix?" she asked incredulously. I replaced everything. I smiled serenely, making Kat almost die of laughter again. I used a powdered chocolate-flavored laxative and poured it into the boxes of cake mix that the caterers had stocked for the Pennington wedding. The cake and cupcakes were almost pure laxative since I threw out most of the boxes of cake mix and replaced them with powdered laxative. I also added some to the regular cake mix so it wasn't too strong. But I didn't expect it to work so quickly. This was just the icing on the cake. That evening, I went to the caterer, ostensibly to enter into a contract with him for the chocolate produced by my factory. He contacted me a few months earlier, and I promised to call him back. I told him that we had some slight delays due to several members of my team getting sick, but once we were up and running again, I was able to take some samples to him. He had a greedy look in his eyes when he thought I was going to give him what he wanted. When he gave me a tour of the establishment, he showed me the kitchen and even noted that they were catering for a Pennington wedding. I already knew, of course, but he didn't know that the bride was my cheating gold-digging ex-wife. I behaved well, and then, as soon as he told his people to finish for the day, he returned to his office, shaking my hand. He said he would do the paperwork for the contract and let me and Tim know when everything was ready. However, I think that he must have completely forgotten about this contract in the days following the wedding itself. Once everyone had left and I had left his office, I headed to the back door to the kitchen, opened a crack, then drove around in my car. I replaced the chocolate cake powder with chocolate laxative and left. I made sure the door to the kitchen was locked and made sure I didn't leave any boxes I'd brought with me behind. One thing Captain Drake taught us back when I was in the service was to never leave a trace. He is a good guy. Last I heard, he had resigned and was now a history professor at UCLA. By the wedding day, all evidence had disappeared. Nothing could tie me to the super laxative cake. Only Kat and I knew about this plan, and she remained silent. When Kat and I returned to our house, she looked at me seriously. "Mac, that kiss earlier." She shuddered. "Kat, I know I overstepped my bounds, but you look so beautiful and I couldn't help it." I blurted out. "Let me finish, baby," she said. "What I'm trying to say is that I think we'd be good together." She blushed slightly, and I leaned over and kissed her. "Poppy, what was this traitor thinking?" "You mean you didn't see the dollar signs in her eyes when she walked down the aisle?" I grinned. Now someone might ask why I set up the caterer like that. The problem was that Sal, the owner, pestered Kat when she first came there to negotiate with him, back when he first expressed interest in doing business with us. After she slapped Sal upside the head, She came back and said we shouldn't have anything to do with him. What has changed is that they were announced as wedding planners in Pennington, and I saw an opportunity to kill two birds with one stone, so to speak. The fallout from the asshole's wedding, as the press put it, was immediate. The news channels and newspapers showed it the next day, and there was great footage of the bride, groom, and guests running to the restrooms from the dining room. I invited all the guys and girls from the store at Kat's house to watch the celebration. None of the scenes there showed us, but everyone knew we were there. We all laughed so hard we cried when the snobbish elite ran to the toilet like their asses were bursting. The only people I felt sorry for were the cleaners who then had to clean up all this mess. Of course, about a week after the wedding fiasco, the cops showed up and started asking questions. Kat and I attended the wedding, but we both said we left when the storm hit because we were worried about our own health. We kept straight faces during our interrogations and only died laughing after the detectives had left. We never heard anything more about them. Reggie, the kid, sued the caterer, but Sal, the caterer, fled the country rather than pay compensation. The last we heard was that he had gone to Italy, where he was from. Not sure what happened to him after that. Reginald Pennington Roman IV was caught in bed with another man's wife less than a year after their wedding. Who caught him? Her husband, and he wasn't very nice to baby Reggie. He called Maggie, and she had some good words for Reggie when she got to her abused hubby's house. Soon after, Maggie showed up on the doorstep of our new home. She didn't seem to have any problems with cheating herself at the time. She would absolutely not tolerate her hubby cheating on her. A kind of double standard, don't you think? Yes, Kat and I moved to a bigger apartment because her small two-bedroom apartment wasn't big enough. Our new ranch-style home had 4 bedrooms, and by the end of the first year, I was halfway through buying it. Apparently, baby Reggie made Maggie sign a prenuptial agreement that stated that if she filed for divorce for any reason, she would leave with nothing but what she brought into the marriage. She still had a job for $125,000 a year, but that was it. No billions for Maggie Sullivan. It was late next year when we heard a knock on the door. Kat was 4 months pregnant, so I gave her a quick kiss and jumped up to answer the door myself. I opened the door to a crying Maggie. "What do you want, Maggie?" I asked in a neutral tone. "I'm sorry, Mac. I'm sorry for everything," she sobbed. "Hey, you were the one who wanted to change," I shrugged. "What's happened?" "I caught Reginald cheating on me," she admitted, sobbing even harder. "Wow, cool turn," I said sarcastically. "Mac, I'm really sorry. I was wondering if there was any chance." She cut herself off when she saw a pregnant cat emerge from behind me. "Baby, who is it?" I heard Kat ask when she caught up with me. She smiled at Maggie. "This is Maggie," and she was just about to leave. I said, slamming the door in my ex's face. I pulled the bolt and pulled Kat into my arms. "She is the past. You are my future. I love you, sweet." "Aw, I love you too, baby," she said. Kat and I got married shortly after we found out she was pregnant. A small civil ceremony, which was her idea, and we became husband and wife. She's still my store manager, and she's still one of my best friends. I love my wife.